Hello, good evening, good afternoon, and good morning, everyone. Welcome to Connect Africa to our daily live streaming session. It has been a while with Kwame, but I have been here alone doing the briefing and the breaking news, bringing it to you. So welcome, Kwame. It's good to have you back.
Thank you very much, Mahlet, and greetings to everyone who's watching us. We are really happy to have you on this channel. As always, we are back to do our usual programs every week, almost daily, where necessary, because a lot of things are happening right now. So we are glad to have you all who are watching us from everywhere where you are across the world, anywhere where you are across the world. We are really glad that you are watching Connect Africa. We are really happy to have you and we celebrate you. We don't take it for granted that you are part of this channel, and we thank you for supporting us, most of all because it is your support that has kept this channel going forward. So continue doing that, and we'll continue to bring the service of course, for Africa, our service for Africa, for the African continent, and we'll bring that African narrative as it is supposed to be, unbiased and not westernized, but Africanized in the right way. Thank you very much, Mahlet.
Thank you, Kwame. Thank you for the kind words to our viewers. Indeed, it's really important. It's them that keep us going. And thank you. Keep the suggestions, the comment coming in. We will engage you in the chat section. So we have been, Connect Africa have been doing, particularly following what's happening, the revolution in Western Africa. But today we are here to talk about the current issue, the United Nations General Assembly, the 78th United Nations General Assembly. So we will look at, of course, what concerns us, Africa. First of all, what our heads of states are saying there. What did they fail to say? What are the good points that they have raised? And then we will also kind of particularly give a focus on what President Biden said, because there is something that he said that relates to Africa. So now, Kwame, let's start in general by assessing the speech of the African heads of states at this General Assembly of the UN. And who did, stood for you in terms of their speech. Let's start with that.
Yeah, greetings to everyone once again. So as Mahlet has already mentioned, we're here to look at the speeches that are being given at the United Nations General Assembly, which happens every year. And of course, as Africans, also the African heads of state go out there to represent us. But unlike...
Kwame, can I come in? Sorry, because I don't want to interrupt after this. I see one comment from Fred Bantu who said Africa will say a lot but do a very little. So if you can just do a crisscross while you analyze them,
these are some of the things. Yeah, these are some of the things which we are going to talk about, and of course that has to do with the we say that we want to look at also the areas where what they failed to address, and we are going to reach that point, where he's talking about that they do a lot, they say a lot, and they do little. So we will come to that. We'll come to that because that is what we are here to talk about. So the United Nations General Assembly, this is the 78th United Nations General Assembly. That means ever since the United Nations as an organization was established, this is the 78th. This is the 78th sitting by the United Nations. And therefore, that is why they are calling it the 78th United Nations General Assembly. It happens every year, like we've mentioned, and the various heads of state from across the world, they go to the United Nations to give their speeches and their outlook and how they are seeing the world, how they are viewing the world from their point of view, and of course to address the challenges that are affecting the world, and to talk about the achievements, what they see that they have achieved as their individual, from their individual point of view. If you're talking about South America, you're talking about Europe, you're talking about Asia, you are talking about Africa, South America. So everyone sends their leaders to the United Nations. And of course, those heads of state who are not able, they normally send their ministers of foreign affairs to go and deliver for them, or they can send their vice presidents. So that is determined by the various, it is determined by the various heads of state. On the assessment that we are trying to do today, unlike the various African media spaces who concentrate on what their heads of state, I've seen today that, for example, the media in Ghana chooses out what the Ghanaian president has said. You see that the media in Nigeria also chooses out what the Nigerian president has said, and they publish it and they show it as, for example, Tinubu has talked a lot about Africa in his speech, and then like that. So everyone, whether it is Ethiopia, whether it is Uganda, whether it is Namibia, everyone chooses out. So, and of course, this is a weakness. This is a weakness for us as Africans, but Connect Africa is here. And the reason we are here is to address these problems, because we see this as a loophole. This is a loophole that needs to be addressed. So what we are here to do for us is we looked at majority of the speeches which have been given by the African heads of state. And then we come to a conclusion, and we do our assessment, and we come to a conclusion, and that is what we are bringing you here to show you what stood out. Of course, in the interest of the African continent. We are not very much interested in heads of state who come and give speeches which are only rotating around internal issues. We want those heads of state who are trying to address the issues affecting all the African continent, and of course on the global scale. And of course that is what our channel is dedicated to. Our channel is dedicated to addressing African issues on a global scale, and that's why we always look at geopolitical issues, in line with how they affect the African continent. So that is specifically what we are interested in. So we look out for those speeches which are consistent with our outlook, or which are consistent with our objectives as Connect Africa. Now, for the speeches have been given, President Ramaphosa gave his speech yesterday. I saw President Nana-Addo also gave his speech today. We saw President Gainob from Namibia also gave his speech. I think President Ruto also is trying to give his. But before that, President Biden also gave from the United States. But as we mentioned, we are more focusing on the African heads of state. And the speeches are still coming. We are not saying that they are complete. President Kagame also has given his speech. The president of Seychelles also gave his speech. President Macky Sall also gave the speech. We mentioned President Tinubu of Nigeria also gave his speech. President of Mozambique also, he gave his speech. So a couple of African heads of state have given their speeches. But for us, the speeches which have stood out in this, aspect, the speeches which have really stood out and they have attempted to address the issues affecting the African continent, I think we can talk of the speech of President Cyril Ramaphosa and President Nana-Addo, and of course the speech which was given by President Tinubu, Bola Ahmed Tinubu of Nigeria. It has some a content that focuses on Africa, and it was talking a little bit about Africa and how Africa should be looked at as an investment destination and all this. But again, it was a lot of inward looking. Now, these speeches which we have chosen out, we have chosen out these speakers regardless of the consistency of the leaders. Of course, this we are going to come back and examine it and look at what are these leaders saying. If you look at is it consistent with what they are doing? And that is what one of our viewers, one of our subscribers has spoken about, that they speak a lot and they do very little. So when you look at President Ramaphosa, I think it was 2 points which stood out specifically for me in his speech. And Mahlet, maybe you should give me a chance so that I can show President Cyril Ramaphosa. I will be happy if I get that chance.
Yeah.
I want to, let me see. So we are going to start with President Ramaphosa's speech. There is 2 important points which he made that stood out, especially on behalf of Africa. And those points were the fact that the world and those countries and corporations which have been looking at Africa's resources as their own, they should start forgetting. They should stop looking at Africa's resources as their own. These resources belong to Africans. I think that was a very important point which President Cyril Ramaphosa made. And then the other point which he made strongly was the fact that the global North has not honored its pledges when it comes to the issues of climate change, and specifically the $100 billion which was promised by the global North, the developed countries, to help the global South to combat the issue of climate change. And this money was supposed to come $100 billion every year since 2015 after the Paris climate change. This money did not come and has not come up to now. So President Cyril Ramaphosa made a very strong point, and he was very firm, and he said that you have to pay this money. So it was almost sort of like what made me happy and interested me was it was sort of like he's commanding that the money has to come like by force, some sort of like by force. This is how he brought it. So let me try to bring it out. Mahlet, maybe we can see it, what he was saying.
Yeah, so in the meantime, I will speak to our viewers while you try to find it. So tell us if you really have gone through the speech, or if you know, if you
I've
have
found it.
watched
I've found it, Mahlet.
Okay, so drop it in the chat section which one stood, for you, stood out. Okay, so this is it.
It is a matter of great concern to us from the global South that these wealthier countries in the global North have failed to meet the undertakings they made to provide $100 billion a year for developing economies to take climate action. This must be changed, and the money must be made available in the interest of development. We support the proposals outlined in the Secretary General's Sustainable Development Goals stimulus. In particular, we support the call to tackle debt and debt distress that many countries, particularly in the global South, are burdened by. And we support many countries in the North count their assets. The continent are once again bearing the cost of industrialization of the North. Many countries in the North count their assets in the mineral resources that are beneath the African soil.
Oh my God.
The wealth of Africa belongs to Africans. The mineral wealth that is beneath the soil of Africa must in the end accrue to Africans. We urge global leaders to accelerate the global decarbonization while pursuing equality and shared prosperity. We need to advance all three pillars of the Paris Agreement: mitigation, adaptation, and support.
Yeah, so I think,
He hangs them in their own words.
yeah, so I think that President Ramaphosa has been consistent generally. Of course, this is, I want to make this very clear. This is regardless of the challenges which South Africa has internally. As a country, of course, you can talk of, the energy problems in the country and the lack of jobs. But generally, President Cyril Ramaphosa has mentioned consistently that their foreign policy is consistent with the interests of the African continent. And one thing I wish is that all the African countries had the same outlook. All the various countries on the African continent, I wish that they had the same outlook, that everyone embeds the interests of all the African continent within their foreign policy, instead of some having, scattered and myopic internally looking, foreign policies which don't care about the affairs of the continent. I think we would be respected more. So South Africa, to a certain extent, or to a larger extent, even when you look at Madame Naledi Pandor, who is the Minister of Foreign Relations or Minister of Foreign Affairs of South Africa, has been looked at on this continent as a foreign, a foreign policy juggernaut because of the way she stands. She's very strong. Of all, if you were giving awards on the African continent in foreign policy, I think she would, by all means take it. I mean, Madame Naledi Pandor would absolutely take the crown of the best Minister of Foreign Affairs on the African continent. And South Africa, for that matter, I believe, could have taken this year the crown of the best country in foreign policy on the African continent. And so I think that President Cyril Ramaphosa at this particular United Nations General Assembly represented very well by including the interests of the African continent, embedding the interests of the African continent into his speech. And I think that this is very, very important. And President Cyril Ramaphosa, I think they have been consistent. He has been very consistent, from all the way BRICS, chairing the BRICS, and inviting all the other heads of state, and standing his ground under enormous pressure from the imperialists and the colonialists, like the United States and Europe, which they have, the pressure they have been putting South Africa under. I think that South Africa, at least under President Cyril Ramaphosa and Madame Naledi Pandor, needs to be appreciated. They deserve credit. I think we need to give credit where credit is due. So with that being said, I think we'll go next to President, next to President Nana Addo, and then we'll listen to him and also what he said, what points he also made at this particular summit. Let us look at President Nana Addo and a couple of points. He made a couple of points which I think that were very important also. Regardless, of course, he's inconsistent. We understand that President Nana Addo is inconsistent. And of course, this could be because of lack of clear vision of what he wanted to do when he was coming to power. But maybe he had that spirit of wanting to do something. But there is that lack of clear vision when it comes to him as Nana Addo. So this brings about inconsistency. this brings about inconsistency in one way or the other, or in majority of the cases, that he says a different thing and then he's doing a different thing on the other side. And this is the problem with President Nana. But he gave a good speech, which speech is really credible. He spoke about reparations, the fact that the global north has exploited Africa and the global south and enslaved us, and it needs to pay the reparations. Reparations have to be paid. Reparations have to, they have to start looking at reparations, to pay reparations to the global south and people of African descent, because their societies were built on slave labor, labor taken from Africans forcefully, and also they have been able to thrive like this because of the exploitation of Africa's resources. So these are the important points which he strongly made, and I think that we need to applaud this in one way or another. So Mahlet, if you can allow me, let me have him there.
After we listen to it, I will forward a question so that you can answer it together with analysis.
Okay.
For the first time in recent human history, not just a question of democracy and a deliberate campaign of disinformation against democracy, but also the propagation of authoritarian rule as the faster route to economic advancement. The belief of young people in democracy as the governance model best suited to build peace and prosperity in our society is under systematic attack. The economic impact of COVID-19 pandemic and the impact of the war in Ukraine have only added to the pressure and the anxiety of our young people. We can also certainly do without having to spend the huge amounts of money we currently spend on security at our northern borders in particular. At this time, unhappily, we feel no sense of the international solidarity that we believe we should receive. It is surely in the interest of the whole world that West Africa should be peaceful and prosperous. We want our young people to be part of a peaceful and prosperous West Africa, rather than part of the thousands that arrive at an unwelcoming Europe after perilous journeys across the Sahara and the Mediterranean Sea. Mr. President, we do not seek to shirk any responsibility for the problems we face that are of our own making. And it bears repeating that we are not craving for sympathy, and we do not want to be a scar on anybody's conscience. But we cannot, and the world should not pretend that the present-day economic and social conditions of Africa have nothing to do with the historical injustices that have fashioned the structures of the world. It is time to acknowledge openly that much of Europe and the United States have been built from the vast wealth harvested from the sweat, tears, blood, and horrors of the transatlantic slave trade and the centuries of colonial exploitation. Maybe we should also admit that it cannot be easy to build confident and prosperous societies from nations that for centuries have their natural resources looted and their peoples traded as commodities. For centuries, the world has been unwilling and unable to confront the realities of the consequences of the slave trade. But gradually, this is changing, and it is time to bring the subject of reparations firmly to the fore. Granted, the current generations are not the ones that engaged in the slave trade, but that grant in human enterprise was state-sponsored and deliberate, and its benefits are clearly interwoven with the present-day economic architecture of the nations that designed and executed it. Reparations must be paid for the slave trade. No amount of money No amount of money will ever make up for the horrors, but it would make the point that evil was perpetrated, that millions of productive Africans were snatched from the embrace of our continent and put to work in the Americas and the Caribbean without compensation for their labor.
Yeah. So I think that President Nana-Addo, I mean, you can say whatever you know. Our viewers can say whatever they want, or anybody can say what he wants. But I think he said what the right thing is, and of course his speech personally, when I looked at it, is somewhat full of contradictions. Of course, it has a lot of contradictions, and somewhat in some way, I really don't like him that much. I'll be honest, but I felt sorry for him in one way or the other because of the problems he's facing at home. So the speech was filled with a lot of contradictions. In one way, he was talking about the fact that the West should continue to help Africa, and for example, and stand with Africa's institutions, for example, the African Union, ECOWAS, and all that, and support it during its times of struggle, because the Africans, for example, they fought in the World War II, and that fighting in World War II helped it helped to stabilize Europe. So it is time for Europe also to pay back and stand with Africa when Africa is facing a challenging period. And of course, he still has this hope in the United Nations, that the United Nations should come through, as if the United Nations has ever gone anywhere and stabilize anywhere, or stabilize any place. The United Nations has never gone anywhere to stabilize any place. Instead, where it has gone, especially in Africa, it has been causing chaos. So you can see that on one side, he's close to the solution. On the other side, he's far away from the solution. And so these are the contradictions which I saw in his speech. And he said that democracy is the only way for us. We continue to cling on to democracy. We continue to believe in democracy in Ghana. But on the other side, he also says that it is not delivering, and our people are becoming impatient because democracy has not delivered as expected. Okay, so you can see that, and he's saying we should cling on to this thing which is not delivering for our people. And at the same time, he knows, you can see from what he's saying, he knows that it is not delivering. Even today, an article came out which was saying that even though Ghana recently received a loan from the IMF, Ghana right now, even right now, is facing economic difficulties, is not able to pay its loans. So that is an article which came out today, that Ghana is broke. It is an article which came out today, even though Ghana received a loan from the IMF, but it is already broke. The money is finished, which it borrowed from the IMF. So you can see that he is aware of these realities, that the system he is operating is not delivering, but then maybe for some reason he is scared to say that this system doesn't work, because these people, he knows that they control him. So he's scared of saying that the system is not working for us, it is not delivering for us. Because if he says that, then he would probably empower the people at home to overthrow him and, you know, overthrow the system. So in some way, that is where I say that I feel sorry for him, that he's some sort of in a dilemma. And then, of course, at the end of the speech where he's talking about reparations, he's recognizing that where Africa is right now, it is there because of the exploitation from the West. And in that, he also recognizes that the West reached where it is because of exploitation. Now, this is also a recognition that the West did not develop because of democracy. It developed because of exploitation and colonialism. But then you are saying that democracy is the only place we should hang hope on. And yet, the people who are telling you should practice democracy, they did not develop under democracy. So these are the contradictions in President Nana Akufo-Addo's speech. And I wish we had a lot of time. I wish we had more time just to spend time on only his speech, and of course go and spend some time also on President Cyril Ramaphosa's speech. But because we don't have time, these speeches are long, and that's why we decided to just summarize and give you the summary here at Connect Africa. And another speech, of course, which was given, as I mentioned, was President Tinubu. President Tinubu, his speech, I was impressed. I was impressed with President Tinubu, not because I like him, but because he extensively spoke about Africa in his speech. He brought up Africa a lot alongside Nigeria. Of course, he was always speaking about Nigeria, and then he would add Africa after speaking Nigeria and Africa. He would say this and this and this, and then he would say Nigeria, in Nigeria and in Africa. He would bring Africa as a an addition to his speech. So he from his speeches, I really was impressed because I did not expect that from him. From what he has been saying, I did not expect much from him, and his actions, of course, what we have been seeing him doing with the ECOWAS and trying to toe the line of France and the West, and that has been problematic from him. So for me, I think there was a little bit of being impressed with Tinubu and his speech which he gave. President Biden also, of course, gave his speech yesterday, which we mentioned, and we wanted to talk about President Biden's speech also. Mahlet, I hope we have reached that point, but there's a couple of things which President Biden mentioned.
I was muted. Yes, should I forward the comments or a question on Akufo-Addo or some were saying, for example, I couldn't relocate it, but we shared at Connect Africa, we shared the video of we wish we share everyone's, but we uploaded the video of President Akufo-Addo, and somebody immediately commented there about his like he saw, I couldn't locate it, otherwise I could have just copy pasted it here in the comment section. He was saying he was like a crying person in front of the world there at UNGA meeting, and he's selling all his gold, the mining things in Ghana. And 3 years ago he has sold many of the things, and now he come and cry, he begs, and he brings for example, Russia, and the person who is commenting, he asks Russia, some hundreds of $1 million has been confiscated by the West because of this war and the sanction, but we haven't seen Russia crying. This only happens.
So yes, absolutely. So that is where I say that I really feel sorry for him. So when he was coming to power, I think because he was educated in Britain, and these people who are educated in the West, when they come to power, they somehow think that what the West is telling them is how things they are when you come to power. You are not supposed to fight anything. You are just supposed to come and then implement neoliberalism the way it is, market economy, and all the things will be very well, will be good for you. So I was arguing with one person a time ago who was criticizing Zimbabwe, that Zimbabwe is not performing well economically, what is corruption and all that. So I was saying that actually Zimbabwe, I think that is doing better than Ghana. The reason being is because the economy is in the hands of the Africans. That is the difference between Ghana and Zimbabwe. And the thing is that Zimbabwe is engaged in a fight of returning the resources of the African people into their hands. And of course, there is corruption. The corruption is going to be there. Corruption is everywhere. Even in the United States, there is corruption. Nancy Pelosi, Biden right now is facing corruption charges. The Speaker of Congress, McCarthy, he came out to give a speech that they are going to start investigations into Biden because of allegations of corruption, that he is associated with some corruption charges for money in Ukraine. So this shows you that corruption is everywhere. So I think that people who use the issue of corruption when it comes to Zimbabwe, I think they are missing the point. So I mentioned that whether you fight or not fight, imperialism is going to treat you in the same way. And that is what we are seeing with Ghana. So it is better you fight. It is better to fight like what you are seeing Zimbabwe is doing. Because even if you do not fight, like what is happening in Ghana, that the politicians decided to give in the country, to give it to neoliberalism, to give it to the imperialists, the end goal is your humiliation. The end goal is the exploitation of Africa's resources and the humiliation of the African people. So whether you fight or not, so it's better you fight. So now that is what you are seeing, that the problems Ghana is in today is almost like it's a country which is under sanctions, yet it is a country which is not under sanctions. It is crying, the country is crying much more than Zimbabwe, which is under sanctions for the last 20 years. So it's better that you fight. So this is what I was mentioning to one of my colleagues, one of my African colleagues, brothers, who was criticizing Zimbabwe as Zimbabwe is this, Zimbabwe is that, and of course there's a lot of other people who have been criticizing Zimbabwe. But if you want to criticize Zimbabwe, look at Ghana. Look at Ghana, and he mentioned that money. Actually, he mentioned the report which was conducted by Thabo Mbeki, but actually the money which he mentioned, the illicit financial outflows from Africa, I think this is what our subscriber who commented was talking about. He mentioned the $88 billion which is coming from Africa, illicit outflow, but precisely the report was a UN report. The Thabo Mbeki report, which was done under the African Union, mentioned about $34 billion. That is what it mentioned. But the UN report, which came out later on in 2021, is the one which mentioned the $88 billion. I think there he mixed it up a little bit. I think it's people who gave him the information. They didn't give him the information precisely, but it was the UN report which mentioned the $88 billion. And of course, this was approximately $100 billion, which is flowing out of Africa every single year. Every single year, it is $100 billion that is flowing out of Africa illegally. And who is taking this money is the Western financial institutions mostly. And when this money was traced, it was shown that the money is going to Washington, Brussels, London, and Paris. This is where the money is ending up. This is actually a UN report, and we have been talking about this here at Connect Africa numerous times. Actually, President Nana Addo, he spoke about a lot of things that we have been saying here at Connect Africa on many cases. We have been mentioning things like this, the illicit financial outflow. So it shows you that Africa's problems is not the corruption, is the fact that they are stealing from us. The West is stealing from us. And actually, Pan-Africanists have estimated that the illicit financial outflow from Africa is not actually $100 billion, is more than that, is up to $250 billion every year. But this is a conservative estimate by the United Nations, which we know, of course, is a neo-colonial institution. So they cannot state a high amount. We know that. So this was President Nana Addo, and And of course, that's why I said myself that I felt sorry for him, because it was some sort of lamentation, like he was lamenting because the things are not the way he expected them to be when he was coming to power. He did not expect to put up a fight. He thought that things are going to be smooth. You will just have cooperation with the West, and then they will leave you to conduct your affairs. So he came to realize that things are not like that. Things are much more complicated than that. So recently, actually, he went and rehabilitated. When he came to power, he neglected Nkrumah's mausoleum where Nkrumah was buried in Accra. But recently, this year, they rehabilitated Nkrumah's mausoleum, or Nkrumah Memorial Park. It's called Kwame Nkrumah Memorial Park in Accra. So he went and inaugurated the rehabilitation. After it had been rehabilitated, he went to inaugurate it. So for me, this at the end of his presidency, because his presidency is coming to an end, for me, as someone who looks at history and reads into politics and how leaders behave, for me, it was a homage. It was a homage, some sort of paying homage to Kwame Nkrumah to appreciate what Nkrumah achieved. Because when Nana Addo came to power, he was sabotaging Nkrumah's work, was trying to revise and try to put down what Nkrumah had achieved in Ghana and Africa, and he wanted to try to show that he can do what Nkrumah did. But at the end of his presidency, I think he has realized that what Nkrumah achieved is not an ordinary achievement. So this, I think it was last month, it was this month or last month, he went and inaugurated the new renovated Kwame Nkrumah Memorial Park. I think it was some sort of paying respect to Kwame Nkrumah and accepting that this man was a great man, if you look at what he achieved and under the circumstances, which he was operating. So that article, of course, those articles are out there. People can go out and see them on the internet. Because of time, let me give it back to you, Mahlet.
What did he inaugurate exactly?
So the Kwame Nkrumah Memorial Park is where Dr. Kwame Nkrumah was buried. It is in Accra. It was built in Accra. But when Nana Addo came to power, he had neglected it and it was run down. Okay? It was sort of old and it was not renovated. But during the end of his presidency, he saw it fitting to renovate the place and make it look nice. And he even did not send the Minister of Tourism to inaugurate, to open the place up after it had been rehabilitated. He went there himself to open up the place. So for me, it was an admission that Kwame Nkrumah was a great man and he wanted to pay respect to the achievements by Dr. Kwame Nkrumah after he himself, Nana Addo, realizing that what Nkrumah achieved was really something very great.
Is he running for third term in Ghana?
No, it is not allowed for him to run for a third term.
Is he also doing a political dynasty? His son is running.
Of course, I don't know. I think he has daughters.
He's close to 80, right? His age.
Yes, he's coming close to 8. I think he's around 78 or something.
He has been 78 for years. Yeah, so let's go back to we focus on the subject. Yeah, somebody said, okay, Zimbabwe is a blueprint of Pan-African liberation. If every country is willing to make certain sacrifices and detach themselves from the colonial powers, they would ultimately be better for it. And somebody also asked, this is Marlon Leo. Another one asked, why we are encouraging the puppets. something like that. But no, we have to give credit where credit is due. I mean, if you really have followed Kwame on this platform, he's a very, very critical, like, when it comes to Nana Akufo-Addo, but today, because of his speech, we cannot continue. Like, if you condemn one person or criticize the president because of this and that, it doesn't mean that when they do good, we should give them a credit. It's the speech is by itself good. We cannot deny about that. Yeah. So
Yeah, Mallet, you can see on the screen. You can share that so that I can show the people where he recommissioned the Kwame Nkrumah, the refurbished. Yeah, so Akufo-Addo commissions redeveloped Kwame Nkrumah Memorial Park. So Kwame Nkrumah Memorial Park is where Dr. Kwame Nkrumah and his wife were buried. His wife, who was an Egyptian lady, they were both buried at this place. So let me zoom in a little bit so that our people can be able to see. So this is where Kwame Nkrumah and his wife, Fatia, she was called Fatia Nkrumah, from Egypt, where she was buried. So this is the place, as you can see. He commissioned it. Akufo-Addo has commissioned the redeveloped Kwame Nkrumah Memorial Park. But the symbolism of it that I was mentioning is that he did it at the end of his term, or as the president of Ghana. So this is where Nkrumah was buried, and normally this is the car in which Nkrumah proclaimed, or he used to use this as the president. So he did this around the end of his term in his last term as president of Ghana. So that's the symbolism of it. There is an admission to the fact that Nkrumah was a great man and needs to be respected. And this is all after Nana Addo has seen that it is not easy to achieve what Nkrumah achieved. It is not easy to achieve what Nkrumah achieved. And that is after him failing, after him doing 2 terms, almost equivalent to the time which Nkrumah was in power, because Nkrumah was almost around 8 years in power. But what he did in Ghana, built a lot of infrastructure, built full towns. He built a full town, an organized town, harbors, oil refineries, highways. He built a lot of things, and then he contributed greatly to Pan-Africanism, to helping other African countries. So when you look at what Nkrumah achieved between those 8 years, within those 8 years, I think this is what Akufo-Addo, after him not even doing about 10% of what Nkrumah did, even achieving 5% of what Nkrumah did, I think he sat down and reflected on it and said, I have to go and pay respect to this man. This was a great man. Yeah, so that is what I see as the symbolism of it.
Thank you, Kwame, for sharing that. Really, for bringing it to our attention. Now let's move and look at briefly President Biden's speech at the UNGA. What did he say about Africa? Or what was the highlight from his speech?
Yeah, from an African perspective, I don't see much that we got out of his speech. As we know, the Western speeches mostly they don't have much substance. They are majorly filled with empty, a lot of words. They are abstract, to say the least. They don't have really substance or practical projects which you can talk about, apart from one project which he spoke about, and this project he inaugurated it. Also, he spoke about it on the sidelines of the G20 summit, which happened recently last week in India. So that project which he spoke about when it comes to Africa was the construction of a railway project within the copper, the copper belt of Africa. When I'm talking about the copper belt in Africa, I'm talking about Zambia, Democratic Republic of Congo, and Angola. If you look at the map of Africa, they want to rehabilitate. There's a railway line which connects Angola to the Democratic Republic of Congo. It is called the Lobido Corridor. So it connects Democratic Republic of Congo to Angola, and then they want to extend that to Zambia. Now, what they want to do here is they want to export Africa's resources, and that is why this is not a very good thing for Africa.
Yeah.
The United States and Europe, they are trying to replicate the same, techniques which they were using in the colonial times and the slavery times to create links which take out Africa's resources. And so this is what this railway line project is about. But when you hear Biden talking about it, he presents it as if it is a project which is going to bring about some salvation to Africans. He says that it is a project which is going to enhance the transportation in Africa and stuff like that. But he's not talking about the hidden agenda behind the building of this railway project. But the truth is that the railway project is about the exploitation of Africa's resources. So that is the and those resources, of course, they are the copper and the cobalt and lithium, and that's why you see that they invited Africom to come and be in Zambia, because Zambia is the biggest producer of copper in Africa. Now, in Congo also there's a lot of copper over there, and then cobalt. So what they want to do is that they want to transport and go and build electric cars, because China has been defeating them, has been overtaking them when it comes to the building of electric cars. So they want to use our copper, because the copper is the one which is used to build electric motors, which are the new engines, or they are the new engines of cars, and you have to use copper to build those new engines. So that's what they are trying to do. They are trying to take out Africa's resources in that regard. So I think that is something which Africans, all of us, we have to pay close attention to.
You're through with Biden.
Yes, Mark.
Yeah, okay, now interesting. CND said I also pinned it here. It's interesting to note that almost every heads of state addressing the UN, which are global leaders, they cannot keep Africa out of their mouths. Yeah, it's like the same way France do not want to leave Niger. So they cannot live without Africa. So everybody has to mention Africa. I did not listen to it. I admit. Did he talk about the Western Africa, what's going on in West Africa?
I beg your pardon?
Did he mention about what's going on in West Africa?
You mean Biden?
Yeah.
Yes, of course, he spoke about it, how they want to continue to support democracy. Of course, these abstract terms which they normally use, will continue to support the rule of law and constitutionalism, the rule of by constitution. We work with partners in ECOWAS and the African Union. This is what he mentioned, that they work with their partners in the African Union and ECOWAS to reinstall the rule of law and the constitution in places like Niger. But of course, they are doing a different thing. They are already negotiating. They are not working with the African Union after ECOWAS even itself doing after ECOWAS failing to do what they expected they decided to do their own thing, that the United States even broke off from France and started negotiating by itself. And that's why you hear President Nana-Addo in his speech saying that the global partners, the global North, have to support the institutions, the African Union institution, the African institutions, ECOWAS and African Union. And it is because of the recognition that the United States had broken off and started pursuing its own policy when it comes to the issue of Niger. So they have a division there. And so that is what we are seeing, that even though Biden speaks about it, but in reality, they are doing a far different thing, even though he's speaking about it at these major platforms.
I think another person that we might have missed is, or I don't know, you forgot, or maybe his speech did not stand out for you, is Ruto.
Yes, President Ruto, he is just spoken. I think he has not. He had not yet spoken. I did not see in his speech. Maybe he will be speaking, because there are very many heads of state. You know, the world has more than 100 and I think 100, more than 130 states. So they are taking turn by turn. Some of them have just spoken right now. Like the president of Angola has just spoken right now about 32 minutes ago. So majority of them are now coming up.
Okay, so hello from all the way, Vibert White from Guyana. Thank you. Your president has just, I think, spoken maybe a couple of hours ago. But thank you for being here. I see people from Jamaica as well, Marlon. But we have all our family, of course, who is here permanently. Siendes, Black Nubian, all of you, Remy, Nana, Zaida, welcome. I just wanted to give a shout out in the middle. So now let's go. Is there anything, after listening, so far, those who have taken a turn to make a speech, and having this platform, is there anything that you would say they should have addressed this African heads of states? They failed to talk about this.
Yeah, I think that our heads of state are still not clear. Number one, they are not very clear about what the problem is in Africa. And that is a worrying situation for us. It should be a worrying situation. It should be a worrying phenomenon for all Africans, which we have to pay very close attention to. They are still not clear about what the problem is in Africa, why we are not developing while the rest of the world is developing. So they have not had a solid grasp or a solid understanding of why the continent is not developing. So if they have, then they are not addressing the fundamental problems. So the fact that they are not addressing the fundamental problems affecting the continent, it could be because they have not understood what the problem is, or they know the problem and they have chosen to concentrate on petty issues because they fear to confront what the real problem is. So that is one of the things which I have noticed. So there is no clear solution to Africa's problems, but we see continued, almost blind and absolute faith in organizations like the United Nations, IMF, World Bank. And so we constantly are hearing from people like Macky Sall and all the others calling on to the United Nations, calling on to the IMF, calling on to the World Bank, how should be reformed. I mean, it is not the IMF and World Bank which built China or built India or built Singapore. It was the Singaporean people, it was the Chinese people who built their country. The United States was not built by the World Bank. It is the American people, and of course with the slavery from Africa, who built. So there's that blind faith, the blind and absolute faith that is still being put in these institutions by the African heads of state. And that is worrying. It should be a worrying phenomenon for us as Africans, because they think that if somehow you reform the United Nations and somehow you reform the IMF and you reform the World Bank, then all of a sudden Africa will have freedom to operate. So this is either fear of the fundamental problem affecting the continent, or absolute neglect of that problem, or not understanding the fundamental problem that is affecting the continent. So that is one thing which I have seen, and they do not understand. One of the things which President Lula da Silva of Brazil mentioned was that President Lula da Silva mentioned that the global north countries received after the COVID in special drawing right $160 billion. Africa, $36 billion. Africa with 1.4 billion people. Europe with 746 million people. I mean, 746 million people. That is Europe. Africa is Africa is 1.4, 2 times as Europe. And they gave us $36 billion in special drawing rights from the IMF. Europe got 160. So these institutions are built on racist understanding and colonial mentality and exploitation. The purpose of these institutions is to exploit. I don't know why our heads of state cannot understand this simple, this simple truth. I don't know why this simple truth has eluded them to understand that these institutions were not built for you. And you are seeing even how they are operating, that the people who already have the money are being given money at a lower interest rate. And you who doesn't have, you are the one who are being given at a higher interest rate. And these institutions are giving Europe, who is already rich and has money, more money, and you who doesn't have, they're not giving you money. So this should be enough to make the leaders understand, to make the heads of state in Africa understand that these institutions are not for you. And so you should stop putting blind and absolute faith in these institutions such as the UN, IMF, and World Bank. So there is a problem there. There is a problem there which we have. Now, there is another issue which I saw, that there is a refusal or neglect of holding themselves, Europe and the United States, accountable for the chaos in the Sahel. Because everyone is talking about, everyone is talking about Niger. Everyone is talking about the chaos in Sahel, how jihadists. But the African heads of state have decided to steer clear of holding somebody accountable for this chaos which happened. And this chaos, these 3 groups contributed, both the African heads of state, all the African heads of state, majority of them, Europe contributed, and the United States with its NATO, Europe and the United States with its NATO. They contributed to bringing this chaos by overthrowing the government in Libya. No one of the African heads of state has held these countries accountable. Even at the United Nations, you do not hear about it. Rather, they are just talking about jihadists, terrorists. But somebody brought these terrorists. Somebody is responsible for bringing these terrorists. President Jacob Zuma and Goodluck Jonathan of Nigeria, they voted for a no-fly zone. And they allowed sanctions. They allowed a no-fly zone in Libya. Nigeria and South Africa, during that period when Libya was bombed and President Gaddafi killed, Nigeria and South Africa participated in this process. So there is a lack of holding self and these external aggressors to responsibility. So then this brings about the questioning by African people whether these heads of state are in connivance with these colonialists who are destroying the African continent. So this, you cannot avoid questioning it as an African. You cannot avoid questioning it. So that is number 2, which I saw at this particular United Nations General Assembly, the 78th. Now, the lack of understanding, which I saw also, I saw another problem, that there's a lack of understanding between the intersection. There's a lack of understanding of the intersection between development and democracy. Like we saw in President Akufo-Addo's speech, the contradictions in his speech. He's on one side saying that democracy has failed to deliver. And then at the same time, he's saying we should cling on it. We are holding on to it. But the thing is not delivering for the African people and the youth. And the youth are falling in the oceans. And you have said they are unwelcome. Our children, our youth are making journeys to unwelcoming Europe. He mentioned it in his speech. Europe is unwelcoming. Even though Africa is very welcoming, we welcome everyone. Europe is unwelcoming. He mentioned it. And all these problems, which are many, but there's still a lack of understanding between the intersection. Democracy is being held up, especially this Western democracy, is being held up as a religion that must be followed, whether it delivers or doesn't deliver. It is a religion, we have to follow it. Now it is a dogma. It is some sort of dogma. So this is another problem that we are seeing with the African heads of state, that in some way, it's like they are overwhelmed by the problems of the continent, but they still insist that they must be there. They are the legitimate group of people who must govern the African continent. And this also is worrying. Now, the other issue which I saw is that the African heads of state do not understand that Africa has reached a level where it has to compete with everyone on the global stage equally. Africa has to compete regardless of the challenges which we have. We have to compete on all levels for technology, in technology. If we want batteries to be built, they should be built here. If we want our lithium to be refined here, then the heads of state have to make effort to build the lithium factories here. They have to make effort instead of always singing and saying the private sector, this has become this false narrative. They have taken it and they are always singing it everywhere. And they have absolved themselves of the responsibility of building these factories and these companies. They have absolved themselves and said it is the private sector, the responsibility of the private sector. Now, you look at people like Akufo-Addo, who borrowed around $11 billion in 8 years in Ghana. Now, you ask, how many lithium factories did you build up with all this money? And how much is a lithium factory for you to refine the batteries, to refine your lithium and make batteries? How much money do you need? How much money does one factory need? Have you built even a single one? You're talking about climate change. Out of the $11 billion which President Addo, borrowed, how many solar panel factories did he build up in Ghana to be able to address the issue of climate change? Out of the $11 billion. So they do not understand that we are supposed to compete, and we are supposed to compete with everything we have as Africans. Everything. And do not let other people define for you how you were supposed to compete and which tools you should be using to compete. So they are coiled into that narrative of private sector, and you hear it even in Ruto's narrative these days, increasingly in Ruto's narrative. And so what we don't understand is whether they are miseducated. They have been miseducated by this Western world. And if they have been, then this is a very big problem as Africans, which we have to rectify, and very quickly. Now, there's also the failure to understand that the problem at stake in Africa is the issue of sovereignty. That is why you see that our leaders are mentioning all these things. These are the things which President Afwerki was mentioning at the Africa Climate Summit in Nairobi, that you people focus. The issue here on the table is sovereignty and control of the resources, and block your resources from going and benefiting Europe and other people and other groups. This is the problem. So in somewhere where you see people like Nana-Addo trying to attempt even to touch the problem where he was talking about the financial outflows, he immediately jumps off it and then mixes up with a lot of other issues. Mixes up with the issue with a lot of other issues. And this is what President Isaiah Afwerki was mentioning at the Africa Climate Summit. And he's saying that don't mix up a lot of things. You're mixing up a lot of things. Focus on the issue. The issue is the resources are going out. But you are mixing up climate change. You are talking about these things, corruption, women's rights, and you are going all over. You are mentioning reparations, you see. You are mentioning democracy. These are not the issues. You know, so there's a lot of understanding about what is really at stake. These people, they think, some of them think that it is a joke. The responsibility they have been given is a joke, is a contest of arguments. And it's the same thing which President Isaiah was of Eritrea was addressing. That this is not a classical argument of which sector, whether it's public sector or private sector, which can develop a country. This argument, it should not exist. Forget about this. Focus on the real issue. The real issue is resources. And are these resources benefiting the people? So it doesn't matter whether it is the private or public sector which uses these resources. Are they benefiting the people? If the private sector is using the resources and they are not benefiting the people, then it is not the private sector which is supposed to use the resources. And this is the case which we have been seeing in Africa. The emphasis of private sector, but we are not benefiting, our people are not benefiting. They are being enslaved further and further in modern day slavery. And that's why our people are jumping out of the continent and running out of the continent and falling in the ocean. So the mixing of issues, I think that it needs to be checked. It needs to be checked, like what President Afwerki has mentioned. So, and of course, they spoke about issues like artificial intelligence. I heard President Gainob of Namibia mentioning the issue of artificial intelligence and how artificial intelligence should be used to benefit everyone. The developed nations should send artificial intelligence, should include the Global South in the use of artificial intelligence, so that the Global South also can benefit from artificial intelligence. But the platform is there for you. You know, technology is there for you. So you ask them, how many of you, sorry, how many of you have contributed any money and put it aside for research into artificial intelligence? Do you have laboratories where young people are learning how to use coding and computers, and you have dedicated money as a president? Have you done that? Because, like I said, the space has been leveled. We have to compete. Africa has to compete. We cannot continue to look at ourselves as vulnerable people who are merely supposed to be guided by another group of people where to go and what to do. So India, with the same GDP as Africa, has gone to the moon. It has satellites in space. Africa does not have any satellite in space. The same GDP per capita, the same GDP, the same nominal GDP, if you aggregate Africa's GDP, is the same with that of India. India invited us to cooperate in space technology. During the BRICS summit, India said we should establish a space whereby the BRICS countries should cooperate in railway technology, should cooperate in space technology. Has Ethiopia or South Africa taken up that, offer? Has Africa taken up that offer and say, we are here, we want to cooperate in space technology or in artificial intelligence? They have not. They go to the UN and give speeches which don't mean anything, and they have not invested into these technologies. Africa should have a fund. Okay, all of them should work together as African heads of state to have an information technology fund which will be dedicated. We should have a fund for the whole African continent whereby we take some of the smartest people, some of our smartest people across the African continent, and we have branches or we have offices or headquarters for artificial intelligence for the African continent. And we have our smartest people there, whether they are located in Botswana. We choose where we want to put them. We should have a fund dedicated to space technology. Our space people, where they are working with space, maybe with India, we invite India to come and work, in Africa. Transport fund, railway technology. But these people are drunk on some drug called the private sector, is the one which they are always talking about. They are drunk with this drug called private sector, everything private sector, private sector, private sector, instead of carrying out, the job that they are supposed to be doing so that Africa is not left behind. So I think that these are the issues which are supposed to be addressed. Climate change in itself, when you talk about Africa climate change, when we came out of the Africa Climate Summit in Nairobi, how many solar factories had we committed ourselves to building as Africans after the Africa Climate Summit? How many wind turbine factories or lithium batteries factories? These are the things which we are supposed to come out with from this, to show that we are serious, not just resolutions to proclaim to the world, because the world, we have seen that the world already doesn't care. And they have failed even to honor their $100 billion pledges, which they did in 2015. So if we go to the Africa Climate Summit, it should be because we want to find solutions for ourselves. We should have come out from the Africa Climate Summit with saying that we are going to build about 5 solar panel factories, and they are going to be in the north, south, central, east, and west. Each region of the African continent should have a factory of solar panels. And then we should have other factories which are going to build batteries, lithium batteries. And we are going to invite China to cooperate with China, or invite India and cooperate with India, so that we can have this technology transfer. This clarity is lacking now, but it is easier to give speeches. So this is missing. So however much these speeches are given, but when there's no clarity in what we are supposed to do and where we are supposed to take the continent, I think this is going to continue to be a problem. And this is what we are still seeing at the United Nations General Assembly by the African heads of state. Continual giving of speeches without a solid substance or no plan of action.
Thank you very much, Kwame. Really very, very insightful points in terms of how this African heads of states could have used the opportunity and raise the real burning issue in the continent. By the way, is it just a customary for all heads of state to speak during the annual UN meeting? And will there be a follow-up for the questions they raise, for the suggestions they raise, or for the for being critic? Is there any follow-up, or it's just that opportunity, or we give them once in a year an opportunity, a platform like this, let them breathe, let them
so I think you are just on point. You are really right with your last statement, that it is almost like a space just to breathe off and to blow off steam. But it is because each country pays a subscription to the United Nations. So each country pays a certain contribution, and currently, of course, the United States is the biggest contributor. I think the next is either Germany. Germany, I think, is the second biggest contributor. So everyone who contributes, is free to come and give a speech to address what he thinks are the ideas. But these ideas, when they are given, is not necessarily that they are going to be implemented, because this is a platform for everyone. So there's no way, as you have seen the United Nations, it cannot impose these solutions on any one nation, unless where, apart from situations where we have seen that it is being used by the most powerful nations who have the veto powers, who are the permanent members of the United Nations Security Council. That, like the United States, who's the biggest sponsor of it, it can use this institution for bullying others. And because even the Secretary Generals, in many cases, they come from the West, so they favor the West. As you are seeing people like Guterres right now, Antonio Guterres, he is supposed to be, who's the Secretary General, he's supposed to be someone who is supposed to mediate this issue of Russia, Ukraine, but instead he is condemning Russia. So you can see that he makes the institution illegitimate. He makes the institution itself lose credibility. So this becomes like the institution is like a playground whereby the most powerful comes there and uses it. So that is why you see that what happens there, if you look at the meetings of the United Nations Security Council, when they are happening, it's like drama is happening there. The United States, so is the United States and Europe, they come there with their narrative and they start pumping out lies, a lot of lies. And then China also comes and says what it says. And then Russia also comes out to counter the lies. So it's like a mixture. You see, it's a mixture it's a chaotic situation that it is difficult to understand which direction it is going. So its decisions are really not that binding. They are majorly binding if they are being pushed by the powerful on the small ones, like how we saw that they were able to implement a no-fly zone on Libya when the United States and Europe used it as an excuse they caused alarm even during the invasion of Iraq. Colin Powell came to the United Nations, I think he was the Secretary of State during that period of the United States. He came to I think he was the permanent representative of the United States to the UN. He came with false pictures to the United Nations to show that there's weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. So the powerful always are there manipulating and causing a lot of lies to use the institution to destroy the weak ones.
Yeah, interesting. Thank you very much, Kwame. So with that, we are through with the topics that we have prepared for you, which is a current issue, and still, as you know, the meeting is going on until the 22nd, and there are more heads of states of Africa that have not spoken yet. So maybe we will come back and talk about it in another live stream. But for now, this is it. So just like what we do before or every time when we have live stream session, we go through your comments, not everything, but yeah, we try to cover as much as possible. Okay, so Marlon Dallas, thank you, Sister Jose Adno, thank you, Dwi, thank you for being here. Deka said, I feel like the Horn of Africa needs to create a bloc like the East African bloc. There's Eastern African community, which is like equivalent to ECOWAS, like SADC. Yeah, so what do you mean about Eastern Africa bloc, East Africa bloc. CND said, and I even pinned it here, UN is a talk shop. Nothing is binding. True. Democracy, Lord Listowel said, democracy has made African leaders lazy and fail to think. They see leadership as a joke and just give empty speech. They are always looking for handouts, like President Isaiah said, okay, looking for handouts to spend on the next elections to win power. Oduko Mukeri, at least 15 African countries have satellites in the space. A good start. Oh, okay. This is why we always say we learn also from your input here. Zaida said, no clarity, no solution. We don't need AI. This is Marlene. We don't need AI. We are smarter than that. Look into why AI is going to do them. Indians' moon landing is highly questionable. I agree we should have been more at the forefront of technology, though. Okay. In the past 3 years, USA and Europe have printed over 9.6 trillion and 5.7 trillion respectively out of thin air using COVID as a cover. This is the cause of the current inflation surge. Who?
Of course, of course. The Federal Reserve of the United States, that inflation is normally transferred to the IMF. Biden mentioned that they are going to transfer about $25 billion to the World Bank. And of course, we know what the World Bank, of course, he mentioned that they are trying to reform the World Bank. But we know that the guy who's the president, the current president of the World Bank, was appointed by Biden and is an American citizen, even though the guy is of Ajay, I think it's called Ajay. He's of Indian extract, but he's an American citizen. He was appointed by Biden. And so that is how they transfer the American inflation and push it into the poor countries, the global south countries. But Africa, the position where it is right now is just because of mismanagement by the African heads of state. But we have enough resources right now to make a good start for ourselves and be able to finance ourselves. Like I mentioned, we have a GDP of $3.5 trillion. Okay, we are at the same level like India, but look at what India is doing, is building massive infrastructure, its own infrastructure, is building railway projects, going to space, building its own fighter jets. Okay, so we should be able to do that. We should be able to do that. But it's because we are fragmented and our heads of state are misguided. They are moving in different directions. They don't have any vision for the African continent. So they are moving, everyone is moving in different directions, that they are misguided. They don't understand what to do, and they don't understand the urgency of the situation, the urgency of the times that we are living in, that they should come together and work on these projects, with as much urgency that is required. So then the United States and its Federal Reserve sees it as an opportunity for it to print and put in the World Bank and transfer that inflation to our countries, because our heads of state have refused to understand that they have the power, and that power should be used for the rapid development of the continent. And of course, misdiagnosis. They misdiagnose the problems of the continent. They're talking about this, they're talking about corruption, they're talking about climate change, others are talking about tribalism, others are talking about sectarianism. So they are talking about a lot of things that they have lost focus. They don't understand what should come first and what should come last. Even though we have, of course, the literature from our ancestors, they have already articulated what should come first. Nkrumah has written extensively these works, but maybe those works that will be taken over by the next generation of leaders, which is coming after these guys. Then I think we will be able to we will be able to bring about some clarity on what should be done first and what should be done next and later, instead of mixing up issues.
All right, then. Yeah, thank you. Okay, Marlene is reminding us, do not forget reggae music, must not be forgotten. In Africa have been educated through this source. We have been sending a lot of message through it, like our ancestors' African drums. Yeah, exactly. No, we don't forget. People love here. We love reggae music. And, I was doing one time, I did this research on the Rastafari people in Ethiopia. And there were one of my informants told me our history, because, there's this, I think maybe, I don't know if it's the same in other African countries. It's every time not peacefully the next heads of state take power. So there is this tradition that everything about past is totally trashed, and we don't even teach that history to our children in schools. So Ethiopian history now, they're coming throwing away Emperor Haile Selassie. So people really do not get, I mean, for that matter, I mean, this is a news. The history department in the university at Saba University is closed. That is the result of tribalism. Because one always want to be on top. They say my history is not told, or this one is lie. In any case, so one of my informants told me we learned our history through a back door, and he told me, do you know what that back door is? It's reggae music. He said, yeah. So we don't forget, just to let you know how much it is valued. Marlon Leo, could the military defense pact between Burkina Faso, Niger, Mali potentially lead to a single nation? We're going to make a video about this, but it's potentially, yeah, almost like a Songa empire. It would be interesting to see what they are capable of. I think if they go with this pace, I definitely think that, and Kwame also shares this view, and there is an initiative as well. Africa need young visionary leaders. Dr. Arikana has been saying it for a long time. Those that need a break on interest don't get it. Okay. Yeah, well, we have those young visionaries in two countries now, Mali and Burkina Faso, and I think relatively General Tihiani of Niger is also young. The top 10 richest people in the world have more wealth than 40% of the world's poorest. President Lula da Silva.
Yeah, President Lula. President Lula, he spoke extensively about the inequality and the unjust world order and institutions, and of course the IMF and how they are exploiting the world. So he extensively spoke about it. The president of Bolivia also spoke extensively about this unjust world and wars. Yeah, so what I see is that I think that the Global South somehow needs to strengthen the working together, because there's no way these few people can be able to continue the control of the world if we are all working together. Because when you look at what Latin America was talking about, majority of the issues which they are raising, they are the same issues which Africa is raising. They are the same issues which India is raising. I've not heard India's speech, but I'm trying to look for India's speech at the United Nations to see what India is saying. I'm really very interested to hear what India is saying. Actually, people like Ray Dalio, who is a major investor we have spoken about here, he has also mentioned that Modi is a very powerful leader. He has compared him to Deng Xiaoping of China. And of course, we have also mentioned that here, in the past, and saying that Modi is a very good leader for India. So I'm really interested in hearing also what India is saying at the United Nations General Assembly. So if you look at all of us in the global south, we are saying the same thing, and we constitute almost around 80% of global population. And so if we come together and work together, I think that should be able to push us forward, and we should be able to stop the hegemony and the aggression by the West. But the challenge is that we are not working much more closely together. And of course, you can see that even in our Africa itself, that these heads of state, it is after failing to achieve what is supposed to be achieved, now that they come back when even the time has run out on them, and they start realizing that this is what is supposed to be done. Maybe we should be working together. And when they did not do that immediately when they came, so that means they didn't come with a clear vision to power, whereby I came to come with to work. I came to the presidents to work with my fellow African brothers. So you see them, like you see President Nana, even though he's mentioning all these things, he has been frequenting Europe. And if you asked him, have you ever visited Tanzania? Have you ever visited Seychelles? Have you ever visited Zambia, Zimbabwe? Has he ever visited Botswana? Has he ever visited Central African Republic or Algeria or Egypt? Has he ever visited Somalia or Ethiopia? But he's frequenting Europe. And now when the time is up for you, and then you start realizing that you're supposed to do something for our continent, and then you start giving these speeches. So this is where we say that there's a lot of contradictions.
Yeah, indeed. Well noted out, Kwame. Thank you again. Oduko says, I expected them, meaning the heads of states, I think, to talk about enabling infrastructure for free movement of goods and people. Maybe others will do. African countries cannot develop with the puppets running the... Okay. Did I miss anything? Americans did nothing for Africa, so we don't want them to build anything because they always have an agenda behind it to benefit themselves and not Africa. They just need to go. Great reporting, Joshua said. So, Joshua, once again, welcome. It's risky to have an African leader be educated by your historical enemy. Well, we are not only the leaders, but also we are sending our children to those countries. Many of them, I was watching the comments on one video that talks about France stopping issuing of visa for students from Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso. And a lot of them were saying, this will only do us good. Please, France, go ahead and stop it, because our children will be saved from that brainwashing. So that's it. Yeah, I think USA is the most corrupt country in the world, losing over 2 trillion a year to corruption. Who? Seeing this. I believe he values the SDGs. Zaida says, I think this is at the time when you were talking about President Akufo-Addo. He looks to the future, although he's also disappointed. I think, if I'm mistaken, then Zaida, you can say something.
No, he didn't have a clear vision. He didn't have a clear vision. When President Nana came, he did not have a clear vision. He just thought that when you come to power, things are just automatic. The money is there for you to use. You're not supposed to put up in a fight. He didn't have a clear vision of what he was coming to do. And so, of course, after his term in office, we'll come here and analyze him. And we'll look at is there anything he has done that is worth remembering in the next 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years in history that he was here as a president? And is there in any way where we can weigh him on the scale of African greatness or on the scale of great African leaders and say 50 years from now, he will be, he will be remembered as a great president? Is it possible? So we will come, of course, and analyze all that at the end of his term, when he's going, because next year, I think he's finishing his second term next year. So that has to be, done. And of course, we don't want to be biased that he may have done some things which are nice and we are just, blindsiding him. We don't want to be like that. So we will have a look at all that. Is he worth it? Even people like Museveni and all the others, this generation of leaders are their leaders within who we can look at and say they will be remembered in the next 50 years and say he was a great leader, like Kwame Nkrumah, or maybe Julius Nyerere, or maybe Robert Sobukwe, or Thomas Sankara. Did he do anything specific in the country that is going to be remembered in that way, that we should be able to call him a great leader? So those are questions which we have to be. So those are the questions which we'll have to answer later on when we do our analysis. Mahlet, you are muted.
I see that there is one thing that you answered. Ghana gets 7% of the gold. Okay, hello, Osie.
Yeah, so that gentleman, I don't know whether there was gentleman or a gentle lady, he said that Ghana gets about 10% of its gold, the earnings from its gold. If you read the book which was written, the book is called The Looting Machine. Ghana actually gets 7%. It's not even up to 10%. So if you say 10%, you are going to get, if you are disappointed by 10%, then you are going to be disappointed more, because the actual figure is 7%. If you read that book called The Looting Machine, that's where you get that figure.
At Kwame, India is among the last countries to speak on Tuesday, 26. Wow, this thing going on for how many days? Thank you, Sendes, always updating us, correcting us. So thank you very much. Truer words were seldomly spoken. Thank you, Kwame, for Marlon is saying, for speaking the truth. Yeah. Teach African youth to be patriotic for their continent, Mother Africa. Stop confusion. Yeah, true. We need to invest on the children. That's the only way to go. Nana will be remembered for not removing the stain from his family name. It's important for Africa to start training future leaders. Black Nubian, thank you for the donation. Zaida Laroy, I look forward to it. Okay. Muhammad Buhari has left power in Nigeria. How will you assess him?
I think we did an assessment on him when he left power.
Yeah, because when Tinubu comes to power, we did it. There was one I missed, but I read that question. Why Guinea Conakry is not in the pact? It's Guinea Conakry is something.
Yeah, so you remember Guinea Conakry. We still have our reservations on Guinea Conakry.
Yeah.
That coup may have been carried out by the United States. So that is why that man has not been very much on the side of Pan-Africanism and Pan-Africanists. So his coup is not, it has question marks. So I don't want to be absolute on it, but his coup, it has question marks on it. It's just like what you see in Gabon. Those two coups, they are likely, they are likely to have been carried out by foreign interests, which are contrary to Africa's interests. That is why you see that they are not being fought against. No one is putting pressure on Gabon and calling for democracy, but they are putting pressure on Niger and Burkina Faso and Mali. Why? Because these are the African people. When the African people take power, then you criticize them and then you demonize them. But when those ones who are not taking power in the interest of Africans, you just leave them to do whatever they want. And so that is what we are seeing in Guinea. That is what we are seeing even in Gabon. Yeah, so that is the analysis on the ground so far from us here at Connect Africa.
To be now a popular, like a people's guy, if you are following the news in Guinea Conakry. But yeah, so far that's exactly what Kwame said. So thank you, everyone. We have to call it off. I think we've got covered what we have planned to do. And then for all the questions, the comments that you have brought here in the chat section, thank you very much. About Chad is also the same thing. It's even worse, more obvious than Guinea Conakry because the way the man came to power. But yeah, it's good. We always ask suggestions for topic to speak according to your interest. So we take a note on that one, and I think maybe we should do Chad. So, Kwame, unless you have any last words, thank you, and we will see you again to our viewers.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah.
We are glad. Only viewers, all of you, we welcome you to the channel, and continue to share the channel, continue to support the channel, support us financially. We have other projects which we are working on the ground with other Pan-African organizations. So support us so that we can continue to be here and also work on behalf of Africa. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So don't forget to subscribe, like, and share the video. Share it with your network. And yeah, if you want to support us further, I shared our PayPal account here. So you can, it's also in the description section. Yeah, thank you very much for each and every one. And bye-bye. Have a good evening.